Right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Tanya, for the lovely invite, first of all, but the lovely introduction as well. Today's pretty special to me. Not only is this the first time I'm giving a talk in Switzerland, it's actually also a talk that means we get to spend roughly the next hour together. And I'm not sure about you, but when I make that kind of time commitment, I kind of like to know who I'm dealing with. Because I'm already the one that's mic'd up, how about I start? I am the kind of person that asks a crowd, how are you doing today? And if the reaction isn't big enough, I make people get up and do jumping jacks. So, how are we all doing today? All right. I thought so. I'm the kind of person that can speak 3 languages, but none of them well. You see, I was born and raised in Basel, actually, which means that whenever I speak German in Berlin, where I currently live, people ask me, where in Bavaria are you from? I have been raised by 2 southern Italians from the teeny tiniest farming villages you could possibly imagine. And whenever I go to these villages and I use words like please and thank you, people tell me, you're not from here, are you? I'm the kind of person that sounds Scottish, even though she very much isn't, because I spent 8 wonderful years in the capital of Scotland. And when people asked me why I moved there right after high school, and I told them to improve my English, they told me, well, you're in the wrong country for that. And just before anyone asked, yes, these were swans that were being escorted by the police back into the Queen's Gardens. But, and maybe most importantly, I am the kind of person that when she gets passionate about something, she will just not stop talking about it. Which is exactly how we landed here today. Now, when Tanya first told me about the summit and about the idea she had for these longer sessions, she said, I would love it if you made it a little bit interactive. So, with that in mind, today it will be very interactive. And now that I've spoken enough about myself, I actually want to hear about you. And I want to know, what do you do all day? So get your phones out and take a couple of minutes just to answer this question. Maybe think about your past week, common things you do in an average week, and let's see the results in a minute. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Hugo. He's had to deal with me a lot over the last few days. Let's just say it that way. All right, I see some very interesting responses already. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, no, you can see them. Fantastic. So we've got meetings front and center, talk to people, PowerPoint, trying this agile thing, process optimization, ghostwrite about product, interesting, summarize, negotiate, optimize, talk to stakeholders. All right, now this is very interesting. And the reason I wanted to ask you this is because I had a theory that actually quite a bit of what you do day in and day out is product operations. I think my theory holds true. We will not go into too much depth in your responses, but thank you so much for sharing. But let's talk about product operations, and let's talk about the promises that came with this new emerging function. Now, several people are making several different claims, let's say, promises on behalf of this function. So let's take a look at a few of them. Promise number 1. A product ops manager does all the things you don't want to do, but that still need to get done. Oh my God, I cannot wait to have a product ops manager on my team. That will dig through all the data so that they can tell me what I should focus on next. That will schedule all-hand meetings and create the slide decks so that I don't have to do it. That will write release notes that nobody reads anyway. I cannot wait to have my very own personal assistant. Now, maybe a little bit needless to say, but this is not something I endorse. Promise number 2, and make no mistake, this is also a promise people are making. A product ops manager will introduce unnecessary processes that will slow everybody down. Why would you possibly want a product ops manager on your team? They are the people lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce on any possible task and make it so complicated that nobody will be able to work. And while I'm actually quite fond of being pictured as this kind of Disney villainess, it's also not something I endorse. So let's talk about the third promise I want to bring to you today. Now, this is the promise that I make when I talk about product operations. This is the promise that I make whenever I work with clients and teams. A product operations manager enables product teams to do their best work by giving them the tools, frameworks, and access to data they need. Now, is that a lofty goal? Absolutely. Because not only do we work with the world's biggest variable, that's humans, there are a million ways to achieve this promise, this mission. And oftentimes, we only know in retrospect whether we were on the right track. And to make things a little bit more complicated, because they're not complicated enough, this looks different at every single company. Now, there are some things that have crystallized into product operations responsibilities recently. But the thing about product ops is that it's fundamentally there to remove barriers to excellent product management work. But what those barriers look like is different at every company. Now, some of us might be doing some of the things on this list. Some of us might be doing things that are completely outside of this list. But nevertheless, it doesn't matter what our day-to-day looks like, because we are all united by the same mission. And that is to create repeatable systems for high-impact work. Or, as the Product Operations Manifesto defines, because, of course, there is a Product Operations Manifesto, to collectively, effectively, and efficiently drive the most meaningful outcomes for customers. So now that we know a little bit about what Product Ops' core mission is, let's talk about what it's like to do product operations. And for this, I will actually let you take the reins. Imagine you are a product ops manager who has just recently joined a new company. And on your very first day, you hear, we have a bi-weekly product and tech newsletter that we work pretty hard on. And we send it to the whole company, but nobody reads it. And what's worse, even though we put so much effort into communicating, people still complain that product is a black box. Now, your mission is clear. Increase readership for your all-important department newsletter. But what will you do first? Now, is anyone here familiar with Choose Your Own Adventure books? OK, I see nodding. Fantastic. This is what it's going to be. You're going to scan this QR code, and I'm going to read you a little story. Every so often, I will give you 2 options to progress the story, and you will collectively vote on whether we go with option 1 or option 2. All right. We all got the QR code? We're all ready and set? Yeah? Perfect. So, As I said, your mission is clear. Increase readership for your all-important department newsletter. But what will you do first? Option 1, you investigate the content of the newsletter. Or option 2, you investigate how the newsletter is shared. Okay, option 2 seems to be winning. Fantastic. So we will go ahead with option 2. You investigate how the newsletter is shared. You discover that the newsletter is shared via email, which means that it can easily get lost in the ether. And it's also posted on Confluence, but sadly, that's a tool that half the department doesn't have access to, and the other half doesn't really know how to navigate. What do you do next? Do you look into alternative methods of sharing the newsletter? Or, option 2, do you investigate how else the product and tech team communicates with other departments? All right, option 2, a clear winner. We are investigating how else product and tech communicates. Oh, this has a backside. I should have known, I printed this. Now, you hear from people that sometimes individual product teams share experimentation results via email. But these emails are infrequent and unpredictable, and every one of them looks different. You also notice that one of your heads of product is in several sync meetings a week, all with seemingly the same subject matter to update other departments, and with overlapping attendees. What do you do? Option 1, do you consolidate all of those sync meetings into one bigger and longer meeting? Or option 2, do you speak to the meeting attendees about why they feel the need to be in so many meetings? Third option, I'll keep that in mind for next time. Good. Option 2, a clear winner. So we speak to the meeting attendees. Now, this is where it gets interesting. First, you decide to speak to Gary in sales. And they tell you that being in multiple syncs is the only way for them to really understand what's going on. They tell you that they need as much face time with product as possible, because they haven't had a product demo in a couple of quarters, and just last week, one of the sales reps stumbled across a new feature while they were giving a customer demo. Super embarrassing. Then you decide to speak to customer success. And boy, oh boy, things do not look much better here. They tell you that they need multiple touch points as well, because it's the only way for them to stay up to date on upcoming releases, and that they need to know as much as possible so that they can give adequate support when necessary. Both parties tell you that the communication they do get from the product and tech teams, whether written or verbal, often comes too late for them to action, and it's actively hindering them from doing a great job. It is at this point that you realize you have run out of options, and that the only path forward is a complete communication overhaul. So for your final decision, what do you do? Option 1, do you lock yourself into a room for 2 weeks, coming up with the ultimate communication strategy before presenting it to your peers? Or option 2, do you share all of the insights and findings you've made along your journey before presenting a comprehensive overhaul as your recommendation? I want to see who voted for option 1, actually. All right, we have decided to share our findings. You get all of the product and tech leadership into a room, and you start sharing what you've seen and heard in these past few weeks. You detail where communication breaks down, highlighting that information is perceived as insufficient and not timely enough. And finally, you explain the negative effects this has had on your entire business. The room is uncomfortably silent. Wow, your head of product says. I knew we could be doing more, but I had no idea it was this bad. Others nod in agreement. A smile breaks out on your face. Well, that's why I'm here, no? Let's see what we can do about this. And you all work together to define a communication strategy that works for everyone. Congratulations, you got the good end. Very well done. Give yourself a round of applause, yeah. All right, now, that was pretty painful, which I think is a fantastic segue to talk about the pains of doing product operations. But before I want to dive into this, I want to tell you why everybody in this room should be listening to this right now. Let me see a quick show of hands. Who here works in a company with dedicated product operations staff? There's a few people. OK. Now, for everybody else, if you don't have a product ops manager in your organization, then congratulations. You are the product ops manager. Now, I talk about product operations as a discipline because that's where I'm from. That's what I've been doing the last few years. But product ops work is not new. Talking about product ops as a discipline doesn't mean we have suddenly conjured up brand new tasks out of nowhere. These tasks have always existed, and these tasks always needed to get done. And if you do not have a dedicated product operations resource, it's up to all of us to do these tasks on the side of our full-time job, whether you want to or not. Now, here's the thing. Since you have to do this kind of work anyway, you might as well learn how to do it in a slightly less painful way than before. I want to talk about 3 specific pains, and we'll start with the first one straight away, because this is the biggest pain point I have noticed when I coach product people, not product ops people, when I coach product people on how to do product ops effectively. It's a lack of direction. You have no idea what is going on. Now, partly this is because this is not your full-time gig. You have a whole other product management job to take care of before you do any of this product ops stuff. And honestly, you're probably not necessarily going to think about the fact that this temporary solution you're about to implement should work with all the other temporary solutions that other people have implemented. I completely understand, but there's a spectrum to this, right? And it goes from completely directionless on one end to super strategic. Now, at the directionless end, we have what? We're just doing work. There's unwritten rules everywhere. People just kind of know how to get work done, maybe sometimes, but then you have to onboard somebody else, and it's like, yeah, we kind of use Jira, but we also don't, and sometimes we use Slack, and just figure it out. Now, slightly more to the middle of that, we have fighting fires when they arise. And let's be honest, this is where most companies are when it comes to product operations. You see something that breaks how you do work, you fix it, you move on. You never figure out whether it actually solved the original problem. You never go back to revisit it. You never measure it. But this is what you do, because that's all the time you have. On the super strategic end, you really have state-of-the-art product operations, where you get to ask, what kind of product organization do we want to become? What kind of product org do we want to be? And a little further to the middle, maybe you might have dedicated resources, dedicated staff, but maybe they don't know how to be strategic. Where I want you to be is in the middle. I want you to be directional. I want you to be intentional about this work that you already do. I hope that you know better than being on the far left of the scale. But we also have to be realistic about the fact that you're most likely not going to be on the very far right. Now, in order to get this direction, let me share some pieces of advice. Number one, you make product operational work explicit. Whenever you are working on something that is product ops work, you say, I am doing this because I have seen this happen, and that is bad. I am hoping that by doing, we will get to state X. You assign an owner both to the direction, and that's probably going to be one of your product leaders, and to the individual work items themselves, because no initiative dies faster than one with 0 or one with 2+ owners. Number 3, you check in often to find the kindling that could start a fire. You don't want to have to wait until fires break out left and right to figure out, maybe we should actually change something in how we approach our work. And last but not least, start small. No more than one major product ops initiative per quarter. Because remember, you still have a full-time job. Now, the second pain I want to talk about is one that I hope you're by now all familiar with, because it was the core of our story, right? And it's the incredible headache that comes with trying to untangle and uncover complex organizational problems and then sharing that knowledge with the organization. Now, the story that we went through together is 100% based on my own real-world experience. This is a task that I had to do as a product operations leader, only I got the bad end because I didn't share my thought process. Back then, I thought what I was seeing was so obvious it didn't need to be discussed. And not only did that lead me to lose time, it led me to lose trust with people. Because when I started investigating, they thought, oh, she's going to go away and she's going to, create a new template. Maybe we can be a little bit clearer. Maybe we can clean up the formatting. And a few weeks later, I come back and I'm like, right, let's figure everything out. Let's scrap everything we have ever done and let's start from scratch, right? I became that nightmare process person that people were already afraid of. I became that person that came into a brand new organization and started telling people what to do. It was a terrible, terrible mistake. And if you ever feel like you might be running into something similar in the future, please learn from me and share your thought process. Ask yourself, now that I know more about the problem, how has my approach changed compared to what I initially communicated, right? I just said this. I was tasked with, check out the newsletter, 30 people are reading it, we're a company of 300, surely there must be a little bit of wiggle room. I came up with, we need to change everything. Not good. Ask yourself, is everyone aware of the information I've uncovered? Does everyone have the same amount of information? This is the thing that shot me in the foot. I thought I was seeing what everybody was seeing. I thought it was just so obviously bad that we needed to find a way to move forward. It was not obvious to the people that had been in the system and living it for years. And last but not least, if my proposed solution has changed radically, with whom do I need to get buy-in again? Right? I had buy-in to change the newsletter. I did not have buy-in for a communication strategy overhaul. Now, the cruel thing about good product operations is that you may have done everything correctly. You got direction and clarity in your product ops work. You are using it to upskill and improve how you do build products. And maybe that means that your team, you yourself, your leadership sees the value in product operations. And now you get to tackle the biggest challenge of all: advocacy. Because once you understand what good product operations can do for your organization, you'll want more. You'll want more resources. You'll want more time to do it. And that comes with a cost. Now, as a discipline, we need to stop saying that product operations is hard to measure, right? This is something I've been hearing ever since I started working in product ops. Well, it's just hard to measure. You know, it's people work, it's change work. We can't measure it. It's not a hard science, it's a soft science. We need to stop saying that. If we expect people to pay money to get us more resources, more time, more strategy, more direction in our product operations, we need to learn how to measure it. And I don't want to share one thing you can measure. I don't want to share 3 things you can measure. I'm going to share 10 things you can measure, just to show you that it can be done. So let's start. Time to data. How long does it take for a PM to access relevant product data? How often do PMs speak to customers? How many people access insights generated from customer interviews? How many product teams work closely with at least one team member of another department? In how many of our regular communication formats do we talk about our strategy? How many of them include our OKRs? How many clicks does it take for someone to find out how we're doing? How many days between updates? How many new people have folks spoken to at a work function or event? How many people have accessed a certain tool in the past week? How many people should have been accessing it? How many people have read the newsletter? You know this one. How many uninterrupted hours does a PM get per day on average? And we haven't even talked about the most obvious one. How much time and money are we wasting on emails that could have been meetings that could have been an email? There you go, just pretend I got that right the first time. Now, are all of these going to be relevant for your specific organization? No. And I sincerely hope you're not trying to move the needle on all fronts, because that would be absolutely ridiculous. But we need to learn to prove that the work we do in product operations is a net positive for our organization, right? It will take a little bit of creativity. Sometimes we'll have to do some automation, some building work, but we can measure product operations. Just as we can measure a change in customer behavior, can we measure a change in how we work? So far we've looked at what product operations is. We had our own little adventure. We looked at the pains of doing product operations, and we've learned what and how we might measure it. But here's the thing. Sometimes, even with the best of intentions, the utmost direction, and all of the right steps, product operations, implementations still fail. And I'd like to talk about that failure by talking about the 3 most common pitfalls when it comes to doing product operations and any change work, for that matter. There are 3 main reasons why any change motion might fail. 1, you're not being strategic enough. 2, you're not being pragmatic enough. And 3, you're not fit to change. So let's get started with the first one, not being strategic enough. Now, I already talked about gaining direction in your product ops work, going from firefighting to having clarity to where you want to go. So I'm not going to touch upon that again here. But instead, let me tell you why you might be lacking direction. We've spoken about this. You are too unaware as an organization that you need to do this kind of work. Maybe nobody has been doing it. Most startups start out this way, completely fine. Your priority is to find product market fit. As you scale, that is no longer good enough. And then you might get into a state where you are aware that these tasks are a thing, you're aware that people are doing them, that they need to get done, but you don't know where you're going. When somebody asks, well, how do we want to work? I don't know, just make more money. And thirdly, even if you have dedicated product operational staff, you might run into a situation where they are too overwhelmed to really become strategic. And I want to talk about this point a little bit more, because I think especially as somebody who does a lot of evangelization around product operations, people assume that I automatically want every organization to have dedicated product ops staff, and that I might think that automatically getting product ops staff means you are doing this better than most other companies, right? When a new product ops person joins a company as their first and only product ops manager, what happens 9 times out of 10 is that they will start with quick wins. And that's completely fine. They should. They should prove that what they are there to do works. They should prove that they can make a meaningful, positive impact to the people who are doing the work on the ground. The problem is, if this person is either too junior or in an environment where they feel like they need to keep proving themselves, they will do quick win after quick win after quick win, and they will never get to tackle the things that will actually move the needle the most. And this is a big problem. Let's look at not being pragmatic enough. And knowing my slides, I really hope this is going to work. So, remember when product management was just this? Creating value for users in a way that benefits our business? And then at some point, some people started to, I don't know, define some abbreviations, make some nice canvases, as we heard this morning, about what that might look like. And then some more people started to come up with some more frameworks and some more ways of working and methodologies and canvases. And then some other people started writing books about these methodologies and abbreviations and canvases and frameworks. And then because that wasn't complicated enough, some more people started creating some podcasts so they can talk about the books that talked about all these frameworks and abbreviations. Where's this gone now? What happened to that? What happened to creating value for users in a way that benefits our business? Amongst all of this information overload, can we really blame anyone for sticking to what they know? Can we really blame anyone for being dogmatic and saying, no, this is the way I do product, this is the best way to do product, and I don't want to hear about anything else? That is safe, right? And it becomes even harder to dissuade them from doing that when that has worked in the past. It might have worked in a different company. It might have worked in a different environment, but it worked. The problem with that approach is that approaching product operations with dogmatism rather than the pragmatism we need is the quickest way for all of us to lose credibility. If we let our beliefs, rather than facts, guide what we believe we should do as an organization, we might as well just give up now. Because we will never get to the end result of removing those barriers that are present in our organizations at this present day. And we really do become those process people that we so hate. But here's the thing. Oftentimes, this happens completely unintentionally. And I think there's 2 things to look at here. Number 1, sometimes this happens because there are too many layers of abstraction between the person making that decision of how we work and the people doing the work themselves, right? Maybe you are in a super huge organization and product leadership pays a pretty penny to get some very, very famous consultants in that have a product playbook top to bottom. This is how you do every single product management motion. This is gospel. You're not allowed to do anything else. Except the people on the ground know that this is never going to work. And they'll just keep doing what they've been doing in secret. But sometimes this also happens because the people making this decision simply do not have enough product experience themselves. It's actually much harder to be pragmatic and to take apart frameworks and view them as the solution hypotheses they are, right? They are not solutions to your problem. They are a possible hypothesis that you need to prove or disprove. Product operations is very, very similar to product management in this way. Let's get to the last pitfall, maybe the most important one, not being fit to change. Now, there have been times in my career where I felt that it was impossible for me to do my job because the feedback I got from my leadership peers was, I don't care, this isn't important enough for me to give feedback on, or I looked at it and I think it sucks. Now, it wasn't really my fault. I had done similar things at other companies, and I knew I could do product operations successfully. But the biggest thing I had to learn is that it wasn't their fault either, because they simply weren't in a state to accept any sort of change. Now, in this organization, we were going through layoffs, multiple rounds thereof. Senior leadership was changing, and it felt like we were asking teams to reprioritize their roadmap every single week. Of course, they didn't care what I had to say about the newsletter, right? They were in survival mode. They needed to make sure that at the end of the day, they still had a well-defined enough job so they could go home and have a good night's sleep. Product operations was not on their mind. And honestly, it kind of shouldn't have been. Now, I briefly mentioned the Product Ops Manifesto earlier, and unlike most manifestos, we actually have 4 prerequisites in there. And I'd like to highlight what I think is one of the more important ones. As Product Ops people, we need the mandate to effect meaningful change and the base level of acceptance and trust from the people within the organization to allow for it. Without this, I am doomed to fail. I cannot change an organization by myself because I'm not going out there and doing all of the work for all of the people involved. I need people to want to change with me. And there needs to be a mutual desire and a mutual understanding that change will happen, and that even though it might be difficult and hard to take at times, we are doing this to go in a better direction tomorrow. And if you're ever in a position to either advocate for change, advocate for product ops staff, ask yourself the following questions. Do I have the buy-in of the senior leadership team for this transformation? I know some people are saying online that, you should just take it upon yourself to change your own destiny as an IC. I have tried, it did not work, I burned out, okay? You as an individual cannot change your entire organization on your own. Is everyone aware and understanding of the fact that strong product operations will bring about change? Sometimes in the lead up to removing barriers, we have to ask people to stop doing things. We have to ask people to start doing things they're not familiar with, or they might not want to do, or do things that they don't know how to do. Product ops work is change work. And last but not least, how can I ensure that this person, if you do get product ops staff, is set up for success? Now, we've talked about a lot of different things. We talked about the promises of product operations. We've talked about the pains of doing product ops work, and maybe we've experienced some of it ourselves today. And we've talked about the pitfalls. Now, I started this talk with a few promises, and I would like to end this talk with a promise as well. And it's one that I genuinely believe in. Effective product operations has the power to transform an average company into a market leader. I genuinely believe this to be the case. And with that, I'd like to leave you with one final option to make. Will you let the undefined systems of collaboration in your organization drive you? Or will you drive the definition of your product's success? Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Antonia. That was wonderful. Thank you for shedding some light on this very misunderstood topic. And I think we have a ton of questions. I will start with one, and then we'll get the audience going as well. So what I often hear from people who have understood the potential value of product ops is like, we don't have the resources, we cannot hire someone. And I think you get this question a lot, but maybe let's tackle it at the beginning. Like, when should companies be starting to think about hiring someone, and what do they do if they can't hire someone?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second part first, and I think that is really making sure that it is a shared responsibility, but that is really something we talk about, right? Because this needs to be managed. Just like your backlog, ideally, you should have a backlog of organizational tasks, should they be necessary, right? I'm not talking about introducing process for process sake, but if you feel like there needs to be some serious improvements done on how you get work done, this needs to be defined. Like I said, people need to own it. You need to make this kind of work explicit. To your second question, now I typically say, oh, well, it depends, like typical consultant answer. But for those who really do want a number, usually when you get to around 8 to 10 product managers, you're no longer able to quickly resolve organizational issues, right? You can't just quickly get everyone into a meeting, talk about things for half an hour, and then everybody's happy and goes off to their day jobs. So usually that's when you would start thinking about hiring somebody. The caveat with this is that it really is a spectrum, right? You might have 8 PMs who are super on the ball. You may be in a company that has grown mega sustainably. You are all intent on doing this right from the get-go, right? You might be in a company that has gone through hypergrowth, and the 8 PMs you have are super junior, and things are kind of chaotic, and the whole organization is slowing down, and nobody knows why. In the second type of organization, you would probably start thinking about dedicated product ops staff earlier. There are some organizations in which you might never need dedicated product ops staff.
Yeah, it sounds similar to like agile coaches and scrum masters. Right. Like once you had one, a good one, you don't want to work without them, but until you have them, sometimes you don't even realize how much work is on your plate. Okay, definitely. Any questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Yes, Dominic.
You talked a lot about, say, product-specific operations, but then you also touched on organization-wide operations. So I'm kind of wondering, where does the scope of a product operations person like end? Yeah. And does it end? Like, is the title wrong, right? Shouldn't it just be company operations? Yeah. Yeah, super interesting question. I mean, doing product operations in a product organization, actually, it never ends, right? Like my ideal state is that product operations talks to everybody, and they really do interface with sales, customer support, all sorts of designers, QA, data teams, anybody that is instrumental in making the product a success. There are some distinctions to make. Some companies have product operations look specifically at the experience of product managers. That means you can go very, very deep, but to a certain extent, you're quite limited because honestly, you can do the most brilliant discovery you can possibly imagine, and it doesn't mean anything if you don't ship anything at the end of the day, right? So I think it's really about finding that sweet spot that works in your organization, but I would also say that product operations starts in product, but then hopefully it extends to other functions as we mature.
And it's also a very philosophical question, like what is a product? Where does that start and end? Because, I mean, unless you define what a product is, it's hard to define what product ops should be doing, right? Because if you think of product as a department, it's one way of thinking about it. If you define it as a system with certain boundaries in your landscape of individual services or things that you ship, basically, it's another one, right? So I think you can only define it when you also define what is a product. But that's for another conference, maybe.
I'd need another hour for that one, yeah.
Yes, there you go.
Hello. So, based on the KPIs that you had there, the metrics, those 10 metrics, and some of these comments now, would it mean that if I need a product ops person or a team, my team is not doing their job right? So I have product managers, UX researchers, designers, whatever, customer success that are actually not doing their job right?
No, absolutely not. So I think the emergence of product ops is actually due to the fact that product management has become increasingly more complex over the years. I think maybe 20 years ago, there probably wasn't necessarily a need for product ops as much as there is today. And I think Leah touched upon this as well, right? We're in an extremely oversaturated market. You can't just build a product and be successful because you're the only one of your kind. There are products for every single possible problem you could imagine. This means that we have to solve more complex problems, and solving those more complex problems is inherently more complex. But I would also like to touch upon this fact that I think product leadership sometimes makes the mistake of thinking that they're responsible for doing product operations, right? As a product leader, you're responsible for ensuring product operations gets done. It's not your responsibility to do product operations, and I think that's a very important distinction.
To what Dominic was saying, one last comment on that. If it's called product operations and I'm the product lead, then it is my responsibility that it gets done, right?
It's your responsibility to make sure it gets done, like you say, right? It's not your responsibility to do it yourself.
Well, not myself personally, but basically our teams, right?
If your PMs have enough bandwidth and time to do decent enough product operations on their side of their full-time job, yes. What happens a lot of the time is that product managers end up with a lot of product ops tasks just so that they can unblock themselves to do actual product management. That's where the danger lies.
That's what I was alluding to with the product role. I think it's often treated like a negative of a picture, like it's defined by all the surrounding roles. If you do have dedicated UX, then you do less of it as a PM, right? If you do have a growth team, then you do less of that work. But somebody's got to do the work, right? Yep. So am I right in stating that when you need to get started, because you feel there's some pain in that area, do you start with like laying out like where is the work and who does it currently, who doesn't do it, and then taking it from there, like who has capacity to take it on? Like do you start shifting also between the roles, like somebody does a bit of this part of product ops, but then hands something over to someone else? Because what I'm seeing in a lot of companies is they're struggling with like, okay, the PMs are overworked everywhere, right? So do we now get the POs to take over all of the delivery stuff and then get PMs to do the strategic stuff? So how do you shift between all of these roles? Is this like a, let's try it, if somebody has a bit of bandwidth, let's give them the task and then see what happens? Or do you like first try to create the map, basically figuring out where all the work goes? Like, are you a fan of like incremental change here? Or do you first try to figure out like who's supposed to do what and then hire for these roles, or not hire but shift internally?
I think it's a little combination of the two. I think you do need that kind of higher level overview of, broadly speaking, these are, let's say, the 4 topics that are really painful in our organization. And then from there on, you can see, okay, how can we do this incrementally? Like, what does an MVP, right, of a new process look like, for example? Or where can we maybe upskill people? Where can we include other functions into that as well, right, provided they're not overworked. But it will be a mix and match. And again, I think this is so unique to every organization. I don't like giving very specific recommendations because it would be just like me giving out another framework, right? Like the danger lies into people holding on to that very specific recommendation and then not going any further to really explore what a possible solution might look like for them.
Yeah, my general feeling is that there's also like a general discussion on like how much time do we want to spend on the system versus in the system, and I know like Nasha is also going to talk about this in her talk later on, and that's a general also strategic decision for the company. Like, do we want to slow down, which sometimes is the smartest thing to do, right? To do a little less shipping and a little more on the systems work versus like trying to keep the pace high with the delivery and do all of the stuff on top, right? One more question, maybe. Yes, Petrina?
When you're changing things for your product organization and there is resistance or the like learning curve needs to happen, do you have any tips on when to kind of abort the mission?
I mean, honestly, it depends how important the mission is, and I think this is something that needs to go from senior leadership, right? I was very lucky that my very first product ops job, we had a group CPO who was like, yeah, of course we need product operations. Like, why are we even talking about this, right? We had the highest order endorsement to really just get our job done. I think if that isn't there, then you need to figure out, well, what's the original problem you're trying to solve, and how important is it to solve it? And it's just like product management. What's the risk of inaction, right? What's going to happen if we abort this now? How will our company look 3 months from now? Will it look largely the same? Or will we be unable to make money?